The Night of the Gunfrighters, Chapter 2. A couple of weeks later, after some brief messages back and forth, Howie, Rich, old Joe Moss, and I went out to meet the Wednesday morning stage that, according to the wire, would bring G.W. Blake to Schuster's Well. Dan couldn't get away from the saloon as he had yet another bartender quit on him. After the McCullough boys pulled out young Cletus from behind the bar and taught him how to dance, the cowboy way, by shooting at his feet, he just pulled up stakes and cleared out. A lot of people were leaving. The rest of us just held on and prayed for a miracle. I'm not sure just what kind of man we were expecting to get off the stage that morning. Probably a 6'4" giant loaded down with 6 guns, bowie knives, and a shotgun, but no such person did. The only passenger, the one who got off, was a tall, skinny girl, all gussied up in the Eastern style and wearing a store-bought dress, a fancy hat, and expensive-looking lace-up boots. She dusted herself off and then immediately tended to the unloading of her things, and there were a lot of them. "Please, driver," she snapped to Cliff Bowman, who had worked the line since before Methuselah, "do be careful with that trunk. There are glass bottles inside. Do, please, be gentler. Thank you." She had a cultivated, Eastern-bred manner of speaking and a voice I once heard described as a mezzo-soprano. There were suitcases, parcels of books, and a great big ancient-looking iron-reinforced trunk. Cliff was struggling with the load, and so Howie and I ran over to help him. Rich came too, but he looked like he was still waiting for somebody to get off the stage. Of course, no one did. It was empty. We got the load down and stacked it up neatly on the landing, and then the young lady graced us with a smile. "Thank you for your help, gentlemen. I do appreciate it." My pleasure. Our pleasure, ma'am." Howie spoke. He hadn't seen a lot of women in his life, let alone someone who dressed in that kind of store-bought splendor. He couldn't stop staring at her, checking his hands to make sure they were clean. We were all just a little smitten, I suppose, but she was awfully young. She was just about Howie's age, if not younger, I figured. "Glad we could help," I said. "Say, ma'am, was there anyone else on the stage with you? Someone who might have got off in the wrong town?" "No. I was the only passenger for the last 3 stops," she said. "Could you direct me to a hotel or someplace that I can rent a room?" "We don't have a hotel, although Dandy Dan has some rooms over his saloon that he lets out. It may not be a place for a proper lady, but we're a little short of boarding houses right now." "I'll make do. I need to get settled in." "Yes, ma'am. And forgive me for asking again, but are you sure there was no one else? Maybe you saw someone running to catch the stage as it left, and he just didn't make it. We were expecting to meet someone. A Mr. Blake." "I'm Glenna Blake," the girl said. "You must be Mr. Donahue." My heart dropped down in between my toes somewhere, and speech was suddenly very hard. Joe Moss coughed. You're the gunfighter?" "Gunfrighter," she corrected. "I thought the card was clear on that point." Rich Fayette was the first one to say what we were all thinking. "Ma'am, if you know what's good for you, you'll get back on that stage and don't look back. If the colors don't kill you, the sickness will." "Women don't last long in this town," old Joe coughed. I was expecting a man," I finally got out. "We need someone tough to handle the likes of—" No, you don't," Glenna cut me off. "You've already tried tough, and that didn't work out for you. You need somebody smart. And I told you, I have references." "But these men, They're killers, the worst kind. We've never seen anything like... Yes, I'm sure they are. They all are. Would you help me with my things to the saloon? But you're not listening to me, I said. These men, they'll shoot you just as soon as... No, you're not listening. I want to get settled in and knock some of this dust off of me. I suppose you do have a bathtub in this town? Yeah, sure. Dan can rent you one, but then we need to get started. After that, I'll need to ask you a lot of questions. She sniffed the air. There's something not right about this town, she said. I felt that just as soon as we reached the crossroads. I'm afraid you may have a little bit more here to handle than a few pistoleros. So, reluctantly, we carried her things to the saloon and then up the steps to her room. Dan gave her the best room in the house, the one on the corner with a stairway leading up to it on the outside so she wouldn't have to pass through the bar if she didn't want to. And Howie, that is your name, right? Do be careful with that trunk. You will be, won't you? It was almost funny watching Howie struggle with that much size and weight and still be gentle, but somehow he managed. Back in the hardware store a couple hours later, after I had a chance to get my breath back, I'd worked myself into a real lather. I figured I didn't give a hoot about any kind of implied contract there had been between us. Glenna Blake had misled us, and therefore that implied contract was null and void, and therefore she was wasting our time. I was determined to tell her that and get her out of town with the next stage, peddler's wagon, or hay cart the next morning. Will she or won't she? If I had to, I'd hog tie her, put her in a box, and send her back to Salem Parcel Post. After we closed the store for the day and started walking toward the saloon, Howie tried to talk me out of it. You ought to at least let her have her say. There's something about her. Something different, I think. I thought he was awfully blame young to be telling me what to do, and I told him so. When we got there, she was sitting at a table in the back sipping at a sarsaparilla with Rich and old Joe, who were drinking something stronger. I guess she had her bath and her nap. She was now wearing boy clothes, a checkered shirt and blue dungarees. Rich Fayette looked uncomfortable. He was probably thinking what I was thinking. It was time to run this little fraud out of town. Glenna looked up and smiled. Then the smile left her face when she saw my expression. Now, she didn't look frightened, or maybe insulted, which is what I was expecting. Instead, she just looked tired. Her left hand slowly went up to the little crystal pendant she wore around her neck. She whispered something I couldn't make out, and then waved the fingers of her right hand sideways. The room started to swirl around me. I felt something weird, but not unpleasant, like a cool spring breeze on a day that's burning too hot. But it was on the inside of me, not outside on my skin. The room stopped spinning, and then I forgot all about what I was going to say to her. The conversation at the table continued. I don't plunge blindly into anything. I check my facts first, Glenna said, nodding to Howie and me as we sat down. You have to in my business. And, just what is your business? I asked. I'm a gunfighter. Frightener may be more grammatically correct, but people seem to like the sound of gunfighter. So it stuck. But what does that mean exactly? Rich asked in his maddeningly slow southern drawl. Her thin lips pursed for a moment, and then she lowered her voice to a whisper. As you frequently say in this town, the walls have ears, my friend. You don't know. Let the McCulloughs guess at it too, although I'm afraid they may suspect by now. Why do you think they suspect? Never mind. You, Mr. Donahue. You doubt my ability, don't you? Did you bother checking my references? I'd hate to think I wasted that money on a telegram if you didn't read it. I checked them, I said, a little chagrined. Nobody's wired me back yet, but the places you mentioned, Hooper's Landing, Bennettsville, Alton's Folly, they're all peaceable enough now. They hadn't always been, though. Can you tell me more about the sickness? She asked. Has it been here since the time your town was founded, or is it something more recent? Does your doctor have an opinion? Has he tried to get outside help, contact a specialist on communicable diseases? Doc Randall's done just about everything a man can do, I figure, I said. He even wired his teachers back east. No one's ever heard of a sickness that just ages you real fast, let alone one that seems to be confined to women. And it's not slow-acting like cancer or tuberculosis, Joe hacked. It looked like he'd done some research, too. It just comes over a person, out of nowhere. Glenna nodded and again clutched the little pendant hanging around her neck. She had an oval face, emphasized by her thin, light brown hair that she parted down the middle. Her eyes were a pale green. Their eyes that seemed to look right through you, like she'd know in an instant if you were lying to her or going to try something funny. Allow me to hazard a guess, she ventured. The disease hit your town just a little bit after, or maybe just a little bit before, the McCulloughs arrived. Am I right? Rich sipped at his whiskey and then drew a long puff from his cheroot. It seems to me that's about right. Well, I never thought about that before. You think there's some kind of connection? She replied with a muted, Mr. Fayette, she spoke at length after fiddling with her pendant. I'll need to speak to your wife. Indeed, I want to speak with all the women who have been afflicted. Aren't you afraid you may catch it? Asked Howie. He gulped down the sarsaparilla I'd bought him and now sat motionlessly in his chair, staring at Miss Blake. She gave him a warm but neutral smile. I don't think it's that kind of disease. She took another sip from her drink and lowered her voice. I think you're facing something worse. Maybe a lot worse. We all shut up. Even the rest of the saloon had quieted down. People were listening. I saw Dan Hayes at the bar on the other side of the room lean forward so he could hear better. Of course, I don't know yet. That's why I need to see these people. She drained her sarsaparilla and rose from the table. We rose too, a little clumsy and maybe too anxious to show proper manners to an Eastern lady. That made her smile, but it vanished quickly. I've got to consult my books and see if I can maybe throw a few things together. Tomorrow, I'll need a horse and one of you fine gentlemen to ride with me. Howie was about to volunteer, but I cut him off. I'll do it, I said. Howie, you're in charge of the store. He sank visibly in his chair. Are you going to need something special, like a side saddle or a buggy, or I started to ask. She laughed out loud. Oh, heavens no. I love horses. I've been riding since I was 6. Just a good horse and a regular saddle will do me fine. Although, I can ride bareback if I have to. Well, even I couldn't ride bareback. I'll get you a horse, I said, and I'll make sure it's a good one. One other thing. Yes, ma'am. Howie and I said this at the same time, beating out Joe Moss and Rich Fayette by about a half a second. It sure hadn't taken her long to wrap us around her finger, I noted. Granny Ma McCullough. That's what you call her? She asked. Well, that's what the McCullough boys call her, I answered. No one has ever seen her? No, ma'am. She lives up in the hills in her own cabin on the McCullough spread and doesn't go out, at least in daylight. Or that anyone's ever noticed. I don't know what she does at night. She repeated. Now, Richard looked ill. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't get it out. He could only stare at the floor.
Mr. Fayette,
Glenna said gently.
You needn't worry. I can be as discreet as your Dr. Randall. It isn't true that girls can't keep a secret.
She smiled again and winked.
We just keep the ones we want to keep.
Rich relaxed a little. Joe got the coughs again and covered his mouth. He sent his shot of rye whiskey down in a gulp and then threw some money on the table. Howie stepped up to Glenna.
Miss Blake, would you like me to walk you home?
Howie cut himself off in mid-sentence, realizing that home was just up the steps and not a mile or two down some spooky dark road. He felt like a fool. I could tell. Glenna laughed again, but not derisively, seemingly amused.
I think I'll be okay. But thank you. Until tomorrow morning, gentlemen.
Howie watched her mount the stairs. He didn't take his eyes off her until she reached her door and was safely inside. Come on, Howie, I said. We got a busy day tomorrow. Joe, Rich, you have a good night. I waved at Dan, who acknowledged me with a nod. Rich reseated himself and ordered another whiskey. Joe Moss hobbled up behind us till we reached the door and then turned towards his lodgings over the funeral parlor. Good night, gentlemen, he said. And, Howie.
Yes, sir?
It's kind of rude to stare too much at a pretty girl. Try to stare just a little bit, okay? Howie was mortified, and his gaze dropped down to the ground. Or, learn how to be discreet. Joe finished with a hacking laugh. Howie looked up at me, and I nodded my head. Yes. It was good advice. So we headed back to my store, where Howie had a room in the back, and I'd left my horse. Howie, with his mind on the new girl in town, kept quiet. But I was wondering how long it would be before Glenna Blake was as dead as Sam Barnett. If a shot out of the dark when her back was turned wouldn't bring her down, then the sickness certainly would. How on earth were we going to get out of this fix, I wondered. Maybe it was time to follow Cletus. Just clear out and try someplace else. But again, that strange, sweet spring breeze washed over my insides. Someone spoke, deep inside of my thoughts. Courage, gentlemen. We're going to need it. I glanced over at Howie, wondering if he'd gone through the same thing or if my imagination was running wild. His expression hadn't changed. He looked the same as he always did, melancholy and troubled. His slightly sunken eyes were focused a million miles away. On the ride back to my house, even though I too was troubled, I took a moment for the first time in ages to notice just how beautiful the stars could be at night. I felt connected to them somehow. Like the universe has suddenly become an even playing field and anything good might be possible. If you hung on to your courage. Courage. The word sounded strange in Schuster's Well. Strange, but welcome.
End chapter 2.